When it comes to drawing exercises, sometimes we need to go back to the basics, and learning how to draw some easy and fun patterns can be a really useful exercise to not only practice your drawing skills, but as well to learn a variety of new pattern styles, design ideas that can be easily incorporated into your own artwork. Patterns can also be used in all sorts of ways, whether they are for abstract artworks or to be integrated into fabric designs for character drawing. However you choose to utilize patterns is completely up to you. And with that being said, hey guys, my name is Matt. Welcome to another video by artincontext.org, where we explore various art related topics, and in today's video we will be exploring how to draw a bunch of easy patterns. So with that being said, let's get into it. Now for this particular tutorial we will only need some simple materials, something like a ballpoint pen, micron pen, maybe a ruler, pencil and some paper. So the intention is we're going to start by creating a grid, a 7x5 grid. So in total we should have 35 blocks, and we can do this by using 5 center increments. Now once we have our grid prepared, we can begin to draw smaller squares within each block, and this will give us some parameters in which we can draw various patterns and also kind of keep some separation between our various patterns. Now once we have done that, we're going to start with a very simple pattern to kick things off, and that is the classic crisscross pattern. Now this first pattern is a classically styled pattern and is very versatile. This pattern can easily be drawn with a ruler and a pen. Simply draw a set of horizontal lines overlapping a set of vertical lines, and in doing so you will create this very unique woven textural effect within your pattern drawing. The next one we're going to move on to is called the checkerboard pattern. So the checkerboard pattern is also another classical pattern that can easily be utilized within an artwork. This simple pattern can be drawn by creating a set of evenly spaced blocks of vertical and horizontal lines, creating basically a bunch of little squares, and then you can simply color in every second square to create that checkerboard effect. Again, very fun and very useful and very stylistically simple and easily integratable into your own work. Now we're going to start moving on to something a little bit different, and that is the triangle checkerboard pattern. Now this is a variation of the same checkerboard but with a twist. So this time, as you create a grid of evenly sized squares, you want to draw identical diagonal lines within each square. From there you can simply color on the same side of each diagonal line within each square, and this will create a really interesting triangular checkerboard aesthetic. You will find that making sure you draw or fill in the sides all on the same side or consistently on one side will maintain that checkerboard quality. So just remember to do that as you create this very unique pattern. Now the next one we're going to look at is a diagonal stripes pattern. So the next one is really simple. This simple pattern can be drawn by making 2 diagonal lines that start from the corners of the square and intersect in the middle of the square. From there you can add more diagonal lines as you wish, and you can kind of also leave the pattern blank or fill it in. That's completely up to you. Moving on, we have the next pattern called the squares in squares pattern. So this simple pattern can be drawn by drawing a smaller square each time within the last square. Once again, you can also add color in every second square to create the illusion effects within the pattern. So you can play around with all these patterns, but bear in mind the idea is to kind of play around with kind of separation of colors to create a very unique quality in terms of the pattern's aesthetic. The next one we're going to look at is called the diagonal stripes pattern. So this pattern can be drawn with your ruler and pen by creating a set of evenly spaced diagonal lines within the square. So you then can color in every second stripe. Once again, you can also be creative by adding smaller lines within the open blank stripes in between every black stripe. Once again, you can kind of tweak and change these patterns, but ultimately we are kind of learning the just fundamentals and slowly building up into more unique and interesting pattern styles. Now the next one we're going to look at is called the Bauhaus pattern. So in a similar process to the previous pattern, we will draw smaller squares each time within the last square. However, this time we can draw lines within a clockwise motion, allowing for the squares to unfold as you draw a parallel line along the border of the last square. So this pattern creates a geometric-like spiral that can be visually tied to the Bauhaus aesthetic, making it a great pattern for abstract painting ideas and just design ideas in general. Now the next one we're going to look at is the tree trunk pattern. So nature often provides us with a variety of easy patterns to draw, and in this one it has more of an organic feel and is very simple to draw. Again, when it comes to patterns, looking to nature can often be a great source of inspiration, hence this tree trunk pattern. We can begin by making a small irregular shape in the middle of the square, and then from there we simply enlarge the shape by drawing irregular parallel lines around that first irregular shape, and by nature of that we'll start to see how this tree trunk pattern starts to emerge. Now the next one we're going to look at is called the liquid effect pattern. Once again, kind of drawing some inspiration from the mechanics of a water-like substance. The next easy pattern to draw does have a water-like effect and is really simple to draw. And we begin by drawing irregular shapes, once again, kind of in this very water-like motion. Allowing them to also intersect sporadically is also a good idea. So from there, we can also draw thinner and thicker marks over various areas of the lines. Drawing thicker marks near the intersecting areas will also create a liquid webbing effect. Now the next one we're going to look at is the line gradient pattern. So this simple pattern is a great way to also create a gradient between lighter and darker areas. Again, learning how to kind of represent simple patterns is also a great way to learn various drawing techniques that can be used to create shadow gradients within your own artwork. Now we draw this pattern by starting with a dense group of lines in one corner of the block, and then we slowly lessen the lines or lighten the density of those lines as we kind of shift through the rows until the other end of the block, resulting in the seamless line gradient. So the intention is to try and create a line gradient. Now the next pattern we're going to look is a wave pattern, very similar to the water style pattern. This pattern is really simple and easy to draw, and we create this pattern by drawing a set of curved horizontal lines that oscillate up and down. We can thicken areas in each of the lines that curve upward and downward, and we can also add thinner lines in between these thicker wave patterns to give the pattern a little bit more detail and nuance. And once again, as soon as you establish these basic foundational marks, you can play around with intervening in your own sort of way, so it's really up to you. But otherwise, the next pattern we're going to move on to is the cow pattern. So this next easy pattern to draw is inspired by the patterns found in the skin of a cow. Again, when we look to nature, we will find all sorts of different marks and pattern styles, so this can easily be drawn by creating various irregular shapes that form around one another, and then from there you can simply fill in the patterns with a marker. Now the next pattern we're going to look at is the asymmetric polka dots pattern. So the next pattern is another classic. However, what makes this pattern a little bit more unique than regular polka dots is that each dot varies in size and length. This pattern style of polka dots is also really effective when you allow yourself to create variations of polka dot sizes. So some long, some short, some round, or some thin. It's really up to you, but otherwise that is the general idea. The next pattern we're going to look at is the inverse cow pattern. So in this easy pattern to draw, we will find that it is the same as the last cow pattern, except this time it is the inverse version. So this means that we can create a set of irregular shapes and fill the area around the pattern with a marker. Now the next pattern we're going to look at is a little strange and has an interesting abstract quality. And we start by drawing a set of dots that run in a vertical and horizontal direction. So we can kind of create these vertical and horizontal rows. From there, we will connect the dots, but we will do so by curving the lines as if they were oscillating up and down in a horizontal fashion or from side to side in a vertical fashion. We want to make sure that the curved areas move away from each other as the vertical and horizontal lines intersect. From there, we can embolden the lines in various areas as we like, and it is nice to have thinner and thicker moments also, once again, of lines within this net-like pattern, just because that creates an interesting quality within this very unique net pattern design. Now the next thing we're going to look at is a squiggly spiral pattern. So this squiggly spiral pattern is really simple but really beautiful. This pattern can be drawn by starting with a squiggly spiraling shape, then slowly enlarging it as you continue to fill the block. The next one we're going to move on to is another kind of tree-like pattern. So this is called the tree branch pattern. And once again, we are looking to nature for inspiration, as it will always be an effective way of finding interesting patterns. Now this pattern is inspired by the trunk of a tree. So we draw this pattern by creating a set of vertical curved lines that run parallel with one another. You want to keep the lines kind of skew and squiggly with moments of thick areas in each line. And you can also draw these lines in between these thicker lines, like thinner lines in between these thicker lines, to create a more interesting aesthetic. Now the next one we're going to look at is something called a retro square. So this next pattern is super simple once again, and you can give off a very retro vibe with this pattern design. So we draw this pattern by creating a set of irregular squares that are imperfect and different in size, and that's just how you create this very interesting retro-like square pattern. The next one we're going to look at is called the overlapping curves pattern. So this pattern is quite an optical illusion, and it is really simple to draw. So you basically want to draw these curved lines starting from one side of the block, and then you build up a set of these curves that kind of go in various directions. You can then fill in these curved shapes with parallel lines that run along the curved shape, and this creates a unique stacking effect. The next one we're going to look at is called the childish scribble pattern. So as the name suggests, this pattern is perhaps the most fun and freeing pattern to draw, and it is rooted in the most childhood-like experience of just basically drawing whatever we like. So you simply allow yourself to scribble in various sporadic directions, allowing lines to intersect, and the result should be this very childlike scribble pattern. And then once you have that, you can basically play around with where you fill in various areas within that scribble pattern, and ultimately creating a very fun and playful design. Now the next pattern we're going to look at is called zigzagging segments pattern. So this pattern kind of has a really cool effect and is really simple to draw. And you start by drawing segments with your ruler that move in different directions. So from there you can start to fill in the segments with lines. The trick with this pattern is to make the lines in each segment move in various directions. And by doing this, you create this very interesting stacking illusion kind of geometric effect, but making sure that those lines move in various directions between each block is a way to effectively achieve this pattern. Now the next one we're going to look at is the classic tiger print pattern. Once again, drawing inspiration from nature and animals is always going to be a great way to find really fun pattern styles. So obviously this is a very classic pattern that is seen in fashion and other design related fields, but the idea is to basically create this pattern by drawing these elongated irregular shapes as if they were stretched out polka dots, and by doing so we create this tiger print effect. Now the next pattern we're going to look at is called the cursive E pattern. So this next pattern has a very elegant aesthetic and is simple to draw. Once again, we draw this pattern by creating horizontal rows of the cursive styled letter E, and we want to make a row that is upright than a row that is upside down. So from there we can fill in every second row with color, but the idea is to basically create these rows with the letter E shape, and then you can do this upside down or keep them all in the same sequence of rows, so you can keep them obviously going in the same way, but it's really up to you. But it's simple and fun and really easy to draw and has a very elegant aesthetic. Now the next pattern we're going to look at is called the cell pattern. So in many ways there is a lot to nature and how it can inspire design, including the microscopic world. So this cell pattern can be drawn by creating a set of randomly shaped circular type of patterns, and then we can create a set of parallel lines within each one. From there we can simply fill in the space around these little irregular shapes to create the contrast between the shape and the background that it is present in, and it kind of creates this cell-like organic-like structure, which is kind of a very fun and interesting pattern shape. The next pattern we're going to look at is a retro olive pattern. Again, this is found often in fashion that is associated with the mid-century era, or in design that is associated with the mid-century era, and this is another retro inspired pattern, and it looks a lot like a string of olives. So we draw this pattern with the idea in mind that we are drawing a string of olives, and we can start by creating a set of curved vertical lines that flow from side to side. From there we can simply draw olive shapes along each line, and then we can simply create separation and variety by also drawing in black dots along the lines. The olive shapes can be drawn as circles with a dot in the middle, and it will create this very retro-like olive pattern. The next thing we're going to look at is a classic scales pattern. So this pattern is inspired by scales that can be found on various animals such as lizards and snakes and so on. And we start by drawing a row of arced shapes along the bottom of the block, but then we keep stacking these shapes on top of one another in horizontal rows. However, the idea is to always draw the next set of rows or the next set of scales on top of the middle area between the bottom two scales. So from there we can add smaller arcs within each scale, and it's kind of like we're creating this bricking effect within our scale pattern. And then lastly we can fill in each smaller arc that exists within each scale to create a more enriched textural quality within our pattern. Now as we move on, we're going to look at another tree inspired pattern, and this is called the smooth tree branch pattern. Now this is another tree branch pattern design, however this time the lines are equal in width and thickness. As before, we can draw vertical curving lines with moments of thickened sections. However, we want to use a single pen width and keep the lines close together. You can also allow the lines to have a little more curve, allowing them to arc and turn more, but keeping the lines the same thickness and parallel to one another will create that smooth-like texture. The next one we're going to look at is called the flowing fabric pattern. So this next pattern is simple yet quite unique. So we draw this pattern by creating a set of straight diagonal lines. We then draw curved lines in between those straight diagonal lines. So we want to make sure that the curves move in different directions between each diagonal straight line. From there we can add little lines to each curve, creating a set of parallel lines that move with the flow of each curve. You make these lines move in opposite direction in each curved segment to create a flowing fabric effect. But yeah, this is quite an interesting pattern and really fun and really simple to draw. The next one we're going to look at is punched holes pattern. So this punched holes pattern is a really fun illusion style design and another easy to draw pattern. So we start by drawing a bunch of circles, and then we can draw a little curve on one inner side of each circle to create a three-dimensional effect. So we can then add lines into the larger inner space of each circle, but by doing so and filling that in, we create this three-dimensional punched hole effects within our page. You can then simply fill in the space around the circle with your marker, and you can also try to do this pattern in a inverse way if you'd prefer, but otherwise really fun, really simple, and a great way to kind of understand three-dimensionality within a pattern design. Now we're going to look at another retro style pattern, and this is called the retro square pattern. Here is another retro inspired pattern, and we draw this pattern by drawing a set of overlapping squares with soft curved edges. We then can color all the small overlapping sections to create a strange effect with the squares, and then from there you can add lines into the remaining open spaces for a more creative effect. Another pattern we're going to look at is another simple one, a very classic one, and this is called the crisscross tiles pattern. Now you'll find with the crisscross tiles pattern, it is actually quite a common design that is used in interior design, also very common in the mid-century era, and this pattern has a very classy effect and can work very well in various design related practices. So we start by making a simple evenly spaced grid by drawing a set of vertical and horizontal lines. We then proceed to work row by row as we fill in each block with a set of parallel horizontal lines, and then the next one with parallel vertical lines, and on and on and on until we've gone through the entire set of blocks within the entire grid. So the intention is to just make sure you always change it from parallel horizontal lines to parallel vertical lines as you go through each row, and by doing so we should end up with this checkerboard effect with these various crisscross tiles. The next pattern we're going to look at is called the skyline pattern. So this is really easy to draw, a really fun pattern, and really strange because when flipped around it has the same quality but in inverse. So we draw this pattern by simply constructing different level geometric bars. And the idea is that when we can fill in one side completely and create a unique distinction between black and white, and by doing so we'll find that as you turn it around it has almost like an anagram effect where we see the same thing but in the inverse way. Now the next pattern we're going to look at is called the abstract bats pattern. So this basic pattern design is a more comic inspired design that can be integrated into more pop culture inspired design artworks, and we draw this pattern by creating a set of M-shaped bats. So we then can draw a border around them and fill in the blocks surrounding the borders, and ultimately resulting in these bat-like shapes that can be used in more Halloween inspired designs or comic-like inspired designs. Now the next thing we're going to look at is called the curved polka dot pattern. Once again, to finish off a more simple curved polka dot pattern that is very versatile and can be used in various ways. And we start by drawing this pattern by creating a set of basic curved polka dots. We can also play around with the length and orientation to give it a more motion-like aesthetic. And those were about 35 unique, easy patterns to draw. Once you have finished your curved polka dot pattern, you'll find that we have gone through a variety of different pattern designs. But otherwise, guys, experiment and play around with these patterns and try to be creative about how you can integrate it into your own practice. But that is it from me today. Again, when it comes to pattern designs and drawings, it is really a fun exercise because the intention is to allow yourself to be playful and free and just see what comes from experimenting and allowing your mind to wander, and by doing so we will find that we come up with all sorts of pattern designs. Again, nature is one of the biggest inspirations to look to when considering pattern design, but not only that, looking around our environment to the urban environment as well can be a great source of inspiration for pattern design. But otherwise, guys, if you did like this video, please show some love by liking the video and subscribing. That helps us to grow the channel, which ultimately enables us to make more art related content for you guys. And if you are interested in similar or related topics, please let us know in the comment section below. We would love to make more videos related to this, whether it's pattern design or just design related topics. Please do let us know, because we'd love to make content around that. But otherwise, guys, thanks again for tuning in. That is it from me today. Until next time, cheers.